know you'll keep letting folks in. So welcome everyone. This is our webinar on the native plant policy here in North Carolina and how it impacts the North Carolina Parks and Recreation Trust Fund. First of all, I think everybody here is a grantee, so congratulations on getting a part of grant award. This policy came into effect after you submitted your award. So we just want to make sure you understand what the policy is and also give you some information on native plants. So we've been pulling a lot of things together. Again, I'm Charlene Smith. I'm the Director of Recreation Resources Service. Today we're going to go over again the policy background. We have Preston Montague, a landscape architect, who's going to talk a little bit about the value of native plants in park landscapes. Maybe spark some ideas for what you have planned. And then Krista White, our RRS graduate research assistant, is going to share the resources that were placed online that you can use. And then at the end, we're going to make sure we have plenty of time to answer any questions that you may have. So I did want to share the RRS team. So these are your regional consultants over here. Depending on what region you're in, you probably already know them, but they're your first point of contact for your Park and Recreation Trust Fund grant. So reach out to them anytime you have a question. And also for today, just make sure we have the chat open. So if you have a question while someone's talking, just pop it in the chat window. Scott Payne, one of our consultants, is going to be keeping track of those, and we can moderate those questions in there. So we'll save questions till the end. But if you have one you're thinking of right now, just pop it right in the chat window, and we'll make sure we cover that. All right, Vonda, I think we're turning it over to you.
Great. So my name is Vonda Martin. I am the manager of the Grants and Outreach Program for the Division of Parks and Recreation within the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. Thanks so much for having us. And I know you're like, Vonda, how did this happen, right? And so I get to blame it on transportation, okay? Because in April of 2023, the General Assembly enacted the Native Plants Act in Senate Bill 318 through the Transportation Committee to require the use of native plants and seeds native to southeastern United States, with a strong preference for plants native to North Carolina in state parks and on state highways. So I guess it's us and highways. We're to blame for this. But no, we're really excited about this opportunity to be a trendsetter for the nation, to move native plants to the forefront of our areas. And it is attached to the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund. So the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources announced the new policy in effective July 1 of 2023, directing the use of native plants at departmental locations and at local government sites.
It looks like her video is frozen. Maybe her connection. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing. See if she comes back in. Well, we can come back to her. I know we had a couple of other things she was going to address, but we'll certainly, I know we'll hit on them as we go through. So let's move on to Preston. We'll turn it over to you. And I'll let you take over, and then we'll pick up at the end. We'll catch up on everything else.
Certainly. And thank you, Charlene. And Vonda, I guess we'll come back. I'm going to share my screen. And if I can just get somebody just to confirm that everybody can see my screen.
That's it. Looks good.
Lovely. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining me this morning. My name is Preston Montague. I'm a landscape architect practicing in Durham, but serving the Southeast. And I have been working on figuring out how to effectively deploy native plants in the landscape since I graduated from NC State about a little over a decade ago. And it is so exciting to be here with you and to share what I've learned, because it's been quite a journey figuring out how to adapt native plants into commercial and institutional landscapes that are not only effective, but also match some of the cultural expectations of plants in the landscape, which can really rule people's impression of landscape safety and appropriateness. You know, according to the USDA, there are many benefits with landscaping with native plants, including conserving water, protecting soil from erosion, and creating habitat and food resources for wildlife. You know, I think all of us have a responsibility of explaining the importance of this bill, not only to our coworkers, to our employees, but also our clients. And so it's important for me today to kind of help arm people with a list of reasons and a list of ideas for tackling this movement. So, you know, some of these benefits include conserving water. The way that I conserve water using native plants is I just plant like crazy and don't give the atmosphere a chance to steal water from the landscape through open mulch areas. Similarly, I use a lot of plants to protect soil from erosion. And, for me, soil erosion is one of the things I look for on all of my projects. It is a critical problem. And then there's also creating habitat and food resources for wildlife. But people who have hesitations about the bill might say, well, conserving water and protecting soil from erosion aren't services that are exclusive to native plants. And that's true. For me, as I discuss the benefits of the bill, I really like to focus on the idea of creating habitat and food resources for wildlife. But even that last point can be challenged by people who have concerns about the bill. And then there's evidence to suggest that exotic plants also contribute meaningfully to creating habitat and food resources from wildlife. And I'm finding a lot of that information is coming from public gardens, which leads me to believe this, that native plants are a great starting point for building habitat and food resources for wildlife. But it may not just be enough to just plant native plants. I think we also need to pay attention to native structure. And so looking at the ways native plants organize themselves in nature here in the Southeast, I think provides us with a lot of information about how to properly organize plants to really achieve all these benefits. And whether it's native or non-native, the way that you organize plants in landscapes in this region can have a big impact on how they conserve water, how they protect soil from erosion, and how they create habitat. I'm not at all surprised that public gardens are discovering that there are benefits to non-native plants, because public gardens tend to have more plants than our typical commercial, residential, institutional landscapes. So relative to conserving water, the best way to do this with native plants, more plants. The best way to protect soil from erosion with native plants is more plants. The challenge with soil erosion is it's typically a really immediate problem. And for me, one of the ways that I tackle instant solutions for soil erosion is typically with non-native annual grass or cover crop species. But if you approach a project and put more plants in at a smaller size, and sometimes from seed, you can achieve long-lasting soil erosion control problems. Furthermore, there's other benefits that the USDA mentions that native plants bring to the landscape, including bringing joy and beauty to communities, that native plants are easy to grow, and that native plants require minimal maintenance. And so let's look at all of these benefits that the USDA stacks up as being benefits that native plants provide. So, looking at this list, all of these services can also be provided by exotic plants. But for me, as somebody who is in the design realm and looking for where to focus my energy on, even though all of these benefits can be provided to a certain degree by non-native plants, I believe that we have an opportunity to focus on native plants right now for all of these. And for me, my critical path is creating habitat and food resources for wildlife. And I think this is really kind of the most important element for us to consider, because it has implications in not only the design, but the maintenance of landscapes. Um, you know, Relative to creating habitat and food resources for wildlife, though data suggests that non-native plants can provide this, personally, I'm hesitant to accept that they're equal. I think that native plants serve native insects, native birds, and all sorts of flora and fauna, large and micro scale, at this moment in time, meaning they're adapted to serve and exploit one another together. And that really is why I think that this is really the critical path. And there is an explosion of interest in ecology and environmental health in the public. And the chance to build quality, research-driven habitat using native plants to attract charismatic birds and insects that those plants have historically served, and only putting native plants in our public landscapes, I think, only better serves a more informed and sophisticated public full of citizen scientists, many of whom may rely on parks as their best access to nature, especially in the urban and suburban environments. Relative to context, to tell you, I'm coming from the perspective of living in downtown Durham. Birds very rarely fly over my landscape. I have to work very, very hard to create landscapes in these urban centers that provide resources widely to wildlife. And so one of the biggest values relative to habitat and ecosystem service that this bill suggests and that native plants provide is we are creating patches. We're using public spaces to create patches of habitat. And a patch is a large, uninterrupted vegetation body that wildlife can exploit that isn't chopped up so much that it loses ecosystem service value. And we have the opportunity to create patches in state-funded projects, especially in critically in places in urban and suburban environments where ecosystem service from landscapes just isn't very high. There is a lack of connectivity between high quality patches and wild counterparts out beyond the city. It's the connection between these patches along corridors is what I think we have an opportunity to build here. And what I'm learning through collaboration with UNC and Duke on some connectivity corridor projects is that it doesn't take many lawns or very many roads to interrupt the flow of box turtle movement, even birds, the movement of birds, even though they can fly. So we have an opportunity to really begin weaving back together a relatively broken environment, which may not be that evident if you live out in the exurbs or in the rural areas. But once you start really living and playing in some of these downtown urban environments, you really get the sense of what deserts we can create if we're not careful. So patches help connect, kind of like healthy ecologies out there into our human spaces and help provide services and resources into the food web, which prevents the disruption of energy flow between resources and wildlife. So, we have more data now that native plants reinforce populations of native insect and bird populations. And who knows what other fungi and microorganisms that we're just not studying that native plants support both above ground, which I think is most of our focuses, but also what's happening below ground is becoming of increased interest among scientists and designers. And I think that this bill ensures that state-funded projects work to conserve existing biodiversity and historic flows of energy in our area. And these historic energy flows of different animal species, different insect species, this is an increasingly precious natural resource that I think we're really all trying to understand, especially what happens when that chain gets broken. What does that mean for us in the long term? Furthermore, I think that this bill and encouraging native plants in the landscape contributes to a sense of place, and it differentiates different places from one another. And I think that has a lot to contribute towards ecotourism. Using native plants, very charismatic, recognizable native plants, dogwoods, redbuds, these things I think help. I think people recognize them more than we give people credit for, and enjoy and celebrate them and feel as if they're of a place, which can be really important in a time when you can basically live a global life through your phone. Additionally, I think that we have the opportunity here and responsibility to celebrate the history and culture of our ancestors and their traditions, who had a much more intimate relationship with the environment than we have the privilege of now. And so I think honoring our ancestors and how hard they worked to survive in our landscapes, there's opportunities to use native plants to put together explicit or implicit stories and narratives into spaces that we should be exploiting as ecotourism destinations. I don't see any reason why it has to be a park to have some signage to explain why a landscape helps this visitor center or school environment to connect to the larger environment and the benefits that brings everybody. And I don't want to underestimate the opportunity to use native plants to really help build, our ecotourism industry. North Carolina is so special. The nature here is just so special. And I think we have an opportunity to really play that up in the design of places with native plants. But the challenge is that a big problem presents itself with shifting to landscapes focused on native plants. We have to think about, well, how's this going to look, right? And this is a challenge that really, I think, plagues designers like landscape architects like myself. And I want to show you guys what I think is a reasonable commercial landscape using native plants in North Carolina. Oddly enough, this is a photograph from Arizona. I don't know, but I thought that this was an excellent example of a lot of the commercial landscapes that I plant. And you'll notice it's relatively simple. So one of the challenges with this level of simplicity is that it doesn't really look at the structure of native plants out in the wild, right? In Arizona, this may be an appropriate structure, but for me, planting in North Carolina, if I really want to serve songbirds and insects, it's going to take more than 120 switchgrass. I need to diversify that palette, modeling the diversified palettes I'm seeing growing out in the wild. And so, I want you guys to think about not only native plants, but how do these native plants organize themselves in our ecoregion? And how would you organize plants differently if you're designing in North Carolina versus Arizona? How do you organize plants differently if you're designing in Wilmington versus Asheville? So I think that this is an excellent example of a resilient native plant focused commercial landscape. However, I don't necessarily think that just using native species in this way will achieve all of the goals. I think we need to be a little bit more playful. And that presents challenges, I think, particularly to landscape architects, because designing native structure and layers doesn't happen well in AutoCAD. And so it may require the design industry to rethink how it communicates planting plans specifically, not only to municipalities, but also to clients. Furthermore, there is people equate native plantings to herbaceous plantings, right? So we're going to have a huge explosion in interest and attempts in creating large-scale herbaceous plantings. I've always believed that in our climate, shrubs are where the best investment is relative to creating these perennial environments, right? Because you can get shrubs at different sizes, different floral and foliar types, but you're going to see a big surge in attempts and herbaceous plants. And let me tell you, as somebody who's been practicing how to do resilient, easy to manage, easy to understand herbaceous plants, it's really challenging. And in our climate, these meadows and prairies that we're looking at in Kansas and New York, it doesn't work here the same. And so we've got to be very careful. But I think the advantage here is that it's going to put new demands on the nursery industry to make seed and plugs more widely available to practitioners. I want to share some images from Raleigh Ironworks, which I think right now is the strongest example of a native landscape, both in structure, the way it's organized, the many layers, and the species that are selected. I think right now, this is the example to follow for state park visitor centers, for schools, and even for commercial environments. It's going to require new relationships with emerging designers that specialize in native plants. It's going to require landscape architects to really think critically about how they put designs together, specifically in AutoCAD, and how effective those tools are for meeting the demands of what native plantings, native plant structures require. And because it's so difficult to separate herbaceous plantings from the idea of a native landscape, we're all going to have to do the legwork about understanding how to translate these Midwest prairies and New York meadows into the Southeast, where everything gets 6 foot here over the summer when it only gets 1 foot up in New York, right? So another thing we got to consider is, how's all this going to be maintained? Well, I think my friend Misty there is covered up by the Zoom images here. But I think that we are going to have to make more space for horticulturists in our society. And so there are big implications relative to designing and maintaining that create new roles for horticulturists, not only in design firms, where horticulturists don't typically stick around long, in my personal experience, but that there's not really a lot of opportunity for horticulturists to participate in the maintenance of landscapes, because this has historically been where either homeowners have decided to do it themselves, or maintenance, which can be a very high turnover environment, don't necessarily have people on staff to train a portion of the industry that turns over so rapidly, right? So I think really the biggest long-term value in this bill is its capacity to catalyze new opportunities for the green industry specifically. And there will always be demand and space for non-native plants. I'm not worried about the fate of Japanese maples or new hosta varieties. Those are fine. I think what we're experiencing is a major loss in biodiversity, particularly with the way that we develop and then come back and plant. And from my perspective, this loss of biodiversity, which this bill responds to, no doubt, is largely due to habitat loss and poor habitat quality in green spaces. And that's why pushing the idea of building habitat and putting that word at the front of all of my conversations about this bill, that's why that's my personal critical path. This initiative will hopefully catalyze new relationships between designers, nursery professionals, garden communicators, and the general public. And I also think it'll create new innovations in plant breeding and the development of native plants to suit the specific needs of both commercial and private landscapes. For example, we have a terrible lack of evergreen shrubs that are compact, that fulfill street yard requirements for most municipalities. How do you recreate the foundation plantings that are so popular, boxwoods and hollies, using exclusively native plants? So we have a lot of room in plant development to properly serve this bill and match cultural expectations from landscapes, because we're not going to win if we just keep putting these radical prairies everywhere that people aren't yet trained to maintain or design, or the public prepared to accept, particularly as it looks in winter, right? And so understanding the long-term value of the shift to using native plants requires also observation and measurement. The results from following this critical path are not going to reveal themselves very quickly, and it'll undoubtedly create immediate changes for people in the green industry. It's not going to hit designers as hard, but I'm sure this bill hits nursery folks real hard. They're the ones who are going to have to answer the call first, I have faith that ultimately this bill is going to help us conserve more water through more plants. It'll reduce erosion by planting more plants and creating habitat for wildlife. Again, using more plants, and for all of these, following the native organization of plants. And I think we have the opportunity for this to be a long-term gain for both the public and the green industry. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thank you, Preston. Great information, and just beyond just like plant native plants. I love, how we think about this as a catalyst, and just kind of how you arrange things, and just organize your landscape. So we're going to transition now. Krista White is our RRS Graduate Research Assistant, and she is going to share some information that we've been compiling since this policy came out, and we have available on our webpage. And then when we go into our Q&A after this, Vonda, I will let you finish up what you need, since her internet went away. Glad you're back. All right, Krista, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Charlene. Thank you, Preston, for that very informative presentation. Can you see my screen? Good. Okay. So if you go right on to the Recreation Resources service page, you will see our normal headings. And now under Resource Library, we have the Native Plants in North Carolina page. This link you can click in the future. Right now it's not working. But we're just going to go over through the resources that we have, and these links are all working through here. So we started collecting.
It's broken. I'll just say.
The menu is broken. It'll be working though. So we have started gathering some frequently asked questions that we've received since the policy has come out, and we've broken them into these 3 categories. You can scroll below, so native versus non-native plant education, and you can click that bar right underneath it, and it'll bring up some of the questions and some of the answers that we've formulated for you guys. And within there are some links for more information as well. And just if you want to move to the next ones, there's sources for native plants and landscaping. It's a little bit shorter, but we have some more stuff for that. and then some of the policy questions that we've received. Hopefully we've gotten some answers for you. And then I believe the grants one's not on. Oh, yes, here we go. So we also created a list of nurseries throughout the state that have said they list native plants and seeds, or they have them within there, or they specialize in them. Some of them have links, most of them don't. You can just do it like a quick Google. Make sure you ask if they don't specify. I know that Vonda will probably talk about that a little bit more in some of the policy stuff, that you need to make sure that you're getting certified plants. We have a list about 100. If you have any others that you're aware of, you're welcome to send them along to us and we will add them onto this list. And then we also have been working on developing some extra grants that are available for native plants, seeds. Sometimes they're just for gardens in particular or plants in particular. So, but as we read through it, it looked like they were pretty all applicable, and that either nonprofits or municipalities or hand in hand would be able to apply together. And this will become updated as we find more resources as well. You can also access the grant resources through the main page again at the menu bar on grant resources. And then you could just scroll all the way to the bottom. And there will be a link there for that as well, right here. You can click through there. So, and the same with grants. If you have any that you know of and you would like to share, we can put them up on here. And that's all I had. So if you have any questions, drop them in the box and we'll move on to Vonda.
Yeah, and Krista, on the if you could scroll back up to the top of that,
Sure.
the menu for the native plant nurseries.
Yes. You want me to go back to that one?
Yeah, right there
Okay.
at the top, we have that
Mm.
locator from the North Carolina Native Plant Society.
Right.
So that's another one we posted right up there that'll help you.
Sorry about that. Yes, this also
Awesome.
includes a map with more.
Mhm.
Thank you for that.
For those of you like me who love maps. And we're working on getting that menu fixed. So but the page is still there. Scott dropped the main native plant page in the meeting chat. And that goes over just some of the basics of, why native plants matter. I think we can here. I'll share. Let me share my screen real quick before we get to. I got to find the right screen. I was going to put our native plant page up here. So on this page, whenever our link really gets to work, I'm sorry, got a help ticket into IT for this. But again, we have some of the drop downs on just kind of the basics on native plant species. But in this section, we work with Cooperative Extension here at NC State has a lot of information. If you've never looked at the plant toolbox, it's wonderful. Now, a lot of that is geared towards the homeowner. So when you're thinking, more broadly for planting in your park or in your town, there may be, but we went ahead and put in some pre-scheduled queries. So if you're in the mountains and you're looking at trees that you can plant, it will automatically link and pull up all of the plants that they have. And you can do a common name or you can do scientific name if you're really interested in those. But it'll give you trees, to kind of narrow it down to ones that are more applicable to your region. The downside on the plant toolbox, and we've talked with the creator of this, is you can't really export a list. So, I mean, that's something that they're working on, how to do those lists. But these are the ecoregions. So, if you're in one of these counties, you can kind of look at which area fits with this. The Sandhills, I think we have linked in with the where we put it in the coastal plain region. So And if you're in the Sandhills, you're probably more familiar with some of those. So, and again, we have a link directly to the native plant policy, the official policy. And this goes to the FAQs page that Krista shared. So, thanks, Krista. Krista has been gathering all of this information and coordinating it for us. And I know Trey Fouché and Scott Payne have also helped with that. So we talked with the extension. So Vonda, I will turn it back over to you. If you want to finish up with anything related to the policy and how that relates to the part of grants.
Thanks, Charlene, and so sorry. And you know, technology is wonderful when it's working correctly. So, and we've all had that issue, but sorry for the interruption. And thanks, Preston, for everything. But before I get more into the policy, I have to thank Recreation Resource Services and all of their research and compilation of native plant information. We want to help you be successful, which will then help our state meet DNCR's mission to protect the state's natural heritage. And you're like, well, what does heritage have to do with it? But native plants are adapted to our environment, our state's environment, and are more likely to thrive, especially during drought. So we're trying to alleviate a little bit of maintenance so that watering, because water is a crucial essential service for us, right? Water is probably the most overlooked accessory that we have available to us. But unlike invasive plants that are non-native species, they overwhelm the natural ecosystem, right? And so for us to support pollinators essential to food production and ecosystem health, and boost otherwise declining bird population that depends on insects associated with native gardens. Native plants, especially grasses, are better able to store carbon and therefore reducing greenhouse gases. So who knew, right? We knew what trees do. We know that they provide shade, but I have learned so much about native plants and how this action by our state is going to make a difference in our own state. So Governor Roy Cooper proclaimed the third week in October as Native Plant Week in North Carolina. So last year to celebrate that policy and our state's amazing native flora, right? So we have Fonta Flora everywhere. We have breweries named after flowers now. We have botanical, organic, everything. And so a lot of this comes from organic plants and native plants within our society. So the Audubon of North Carolina and the Department of Cultural and Natural Resources did a celebratory planting at Jockey Ridge State Park to celebrate Native Plant Week last year. And even our state parks are providing native plant gardens as we continue to move in that direction. So we're super excited about this. And like I said, we want to help you be successful. So again, we appreciate Recreation Resources Service research and all the input from the local government as they were compiling the website. And we're going to continue to need your help to help us collect data to tell the story of how grant recipients are leading this movement to help guide the native plant policy. So I know that one of the big questions is going to be, Vonda, how are you going to enforce this policy? We want you to provide and continually provide to us how your landscapes from native applications are being fulfilled through the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund. So we've added the native plant section to our annual report, and we're going to need you to tell us what you have planted and how much of it have you planted as you move through the landscaping of your park projects. So we hope that the resources that are on the Recreation Resources or RS website can help you get started. We hope that the employment of seeds and horticulturists and the importance of all of that, as well as the vendors in our state, are preparing to help us be successful as well. So making those connections and starting those relationships is very important for you to do early on, as we all try to tackle and meet the mission of this trend setting for our state. So, Charlene, I'll turn it back over to you, and you can handle any questions that we have. And Preston, thanks again for your presentation. I'm super excited. I really am super excited about the native plant policy and how it's going to be implemented into our park settings and transportation and wildflowers and all of the settings to make our state an even more beautiful place.
Great. Thank you, Vonda. So we'll open up. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can unmute, raise your hand, and we'll be glad to answer questions. Some may have questions about how when you work with a landscaper to provide plants, how do you make sure those are native and that they're not substituted once you get them? So I think I see Scott shaking his head. That's something that needs to be checked, I believe.
I do think that's a good point, Charlene, and I know Scott agrees with it, that when you're writing your contracts for or your RFPs, that you make sure that substitution is addressed with the landscaping piece, because typically landscapers, if they can't find a native plant, they'll just put in a substitute, whatever is a likely substitute. So make sure that you're writing into contracts, into RFPs and RFQs, that substitutes need to be native as well.
Yeah, Trey, you're right. It should definitely be in the contract that whoever your GC or your landscape contractor, that any substitutes must also meet that policy.
Yeah, because one of the things that we're going to ask you for in your closing documentation is the list of native plants that you planted. And when the consultants meet with you on site to close out, usually landscaping is last. Usually landscaping is the first thing to get cut out of your budget. So one, make sure that it stays in your budget, and then make sure that you have maybe some type of signage. That's something that we can look into for you. Maybe even plant identification markers, so that when the consultants come to your site to close out, it'll be easily identifiable. And you would be amazed how many locals come through your park and see something that's beautiful. Now you can just use your app on your phone or Google to find out what it is. But it's a great way for the public to see how native plants can be just as beautiful as non-native plants. So figure out if we can help you with some type of signage and you have some suggestions, just let us know how we can help you be successful.
Great, thanks. And I see Ashley commented that she's very excited about the policy. And she puts a note that, it will push the nursery industry to start raising more natives to make them readily available. And we do recognize right away that that is a challenge. A lot of nurseries, whatever they sell in the most volume is what they have on hand. Some, depending on the native plants, some of them might take longer to grow to get to a size where you need to plant them. So we hope also that this policy will help them, motivate them, and encourage them to grow more native plants.
To that too, Charlene, we hope that it creates native plant nurseries. I mean, it's one thing to sell in bulk, but to be able to provide just native plant nurseries and try to push our state out of their comfort zone, I think that is a big plus for us as well.
Mhm.
So take the proclamation, we'll put it on the website from the governor. If you have a local nursery that you work with on a regular basis, take them the proclamation and say, help us be successful by having these available to us and our residents.
Right.
Ron, if I can add to that, there are a lot of native plant nurseries that have developed during the pandemic, but they're often in backyards or very small operations. And so organizations like the North Carolina Botanical Garden or the Cullowhee Native Plant Conference have been working to identify top performers in some of the small native plant nurseries. And for those of you making planting decisions, one of the things that I discussed with nursery workers is that when it comes to parks and a lot of commercial work, you're going to be working mostly with canopy trees, understory trees, and shrubs in a lot of these environments. And so I encourage designers to do some research into keystone native species. And these are native species that serve more wildlife than others. For example, oak, river birch, some of the cherries. These are all native tree species that outperform other species. This is by focusing your designs on deploying these keystone trees, shrubs, and herbaceous plants will help you, I think, really create those ecosystem service goals that this bill requires. Additionally, I encourage any designers on the call to get organized about the native plants for projects and make lists of canopy trees, understory trees, small, medium, and large shrubs, ornamental grasses, and perennials. And go ahead and get your lists going. And maybe give comments in an Excel spreadsheet where, switchgrass is a good large grass and great for erosion control. Start giving them qualifiers and identifying the service potential of different plants. For example, Cherokee sedge is an excellent replacement for liriope in most instances. And when it comes to conserving water, reducing erosion, if you have an opportunity to put evergreen shrubs as a foundation planting at the base of your building, well, rather than just keep mulching those shrubs every year, could you go ahead and specify Cherokee sedge as a living mulch under all those shrubs? I think you'll get more long-term benefit, though it asks a smaller upfront increase in plant investment.
Preston, a question for you, aligned with your comments about building that list. Would you also encourage these folks to focus on providing good soils for that base of planting, especially in a disturbed area where the original soil may have been moved?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Scott. Yes, I've discovered in my practice that if I focus on drainage, I get better results for my plants and quicker growth. You'd think that well-drained soils might present a dehydration problem. But I've noticed that if you really put some upfront investment in soil amendment, which can be compost, pine bark fines, even fine gravels, and really focus on drainage, especially for herbaceous plants. If you want all of these perennials and ornamental grasses to remain well behaved and to resemble these prairie images that so many famous designers are presenting, maximize drainage. Don't treat those perennials and grasses too nicely. They'll get out of hand. Really create deep, luxurious, well-drained soils for your trees and shrubs. But sometimes I think it pays to, make your perennials and ornamental grasses struggle a bit. it tends to keep them shorter. It tends to make them flower more, and it tends to keep them a little bit better behaved and more predictable, so that maintenance crews aren't stepping into, a different planting to manage every year because things got out of control and some things got outcompeted or some things just, fizzled out. One of the things we're beginning to learn is that a lot of the most popular perennials we're choosing for these landscapes only live a couple of years. And so I think it's important for those of you who are not only designers, but management professionals and property owners to identify those species that persist. And that puts some pressure on designers to do post-occupancy follow-ups on projects, which historically I don't think our profession has prioritized as much as architects do. Following up and documenting the successes and the failures of projects you put in the ground will help you develop that short list of natives that I think your organization could use to outcompete your other folks going for projects. And I want to emphasize to my point in the video, it's not so much about having a massive diversity of plants, but a diversity of layers of those plants. Remember, this isn't Arizona, this is North Carolina. You've got canopy trees, understory trees, shrubs, ornamental grasses, and then perennials. And I encourage you to be fussy with the layers, but not the number of species you have to learn, and focus on those long-lived species. Rudbeckia, black-eyed Susan, it doesn't live that long, so you got to be very careful.
Great, thanks. Thank you. All good info. Does anybody else have any questions? I know some questions early on that we got was, if related to the policy and you're part of grant project, if I don't have landscaping in my project scope, or my budget is not on my plan, do I still need to plant native plants in my park, even if I'm paying for it, not with Partif? And I believe, Vonda, that is a yes.
Yeah, I mean, we're all moving toward the goal of having only native plants, right? So, for example, kudzu is an extremely invasive plant, and I know that every community in North Carolina fights that battle with it, right? And so we're trying to choke them out. We're trying to move where we're taking care of the natural environment by improving the natural environment with native plants. So even in other parks that aren't funded with the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund, we hope that you take this initiative and run with it, because it's going to make our environment better for all that use the environment. So yeah, if you don't have landscaping in your budget, we're still encouraging you, when you do plant anything or replace anything, that you replace it with, that you plant and replace with native plants.
Just to clarify on that, Vonda, you said if these grantees did not put a line item in for native plantings this go round, they just need to revise to that they're going to do it in the future. It's not something they need to add in right now. They just need to have a plan within there.
Well, if landscaping wasn't a part, if it's all facilities, right, and you're not going to put a new plant in the ground, then we understand that, right? So we're not expecting you, but when you're moving forward with your landscaping, we want to encourage you. We can't make you, but we want you to encourage you to plant native plants and to start making that a goal throughout your department. It's for the betterment of our state. As beautiful as it already is, we want as many native plants in our parks as possible, and we want to be able to tell the story. We'd love to say this policy, when these projects close out in 3 years, right, that we planted 1,000 native plants throughout the state just through our park projects, right? So we're all trying to move toward the goal of getting native plants in our parks, because it only helps, and there's opportunities to plant things to educate ourselves, I guess, more readily. Like, who knew that Cherokee sage was a living mulch? I'm going to look it up and talk to my nursery and get it planted right away, right? So that I don't have to spend money on mulch every year. So it's using it in your own personal yard as well as our parks. We really want to move this trend forward, or this policy forward, and make it amazing, right? We just don't want to dabble at it. So where we can't make you, we definitely encourage you to do so if you can.
Yeah, and thanks, Fonda. And the other thing a lot of folks ask about exceptions, certainly there are. If you're doing athletic fields, turf grass, there's a lot of turf grass, that is an exception. If you have a botanical garden or some formal gardens, those are also. So in that policy we have listed on the website, there are exceptions. I think we were even asking about the giant sunflowers fields. Those are a crop, right? So just talk with us, talk with your regional consultant if you have questions, and we'll be glad to talk through, because we're learning this policy and how it applies as well. And we can always, get in touch with Fonda or Lillian on here, and we'll answer your questions. Okay, great. Are there anybody else?
John Hill has his hand up, Charlotte.
John.
Not virtual. I mean, really has his hand up, right?
What you got, John?
Hey, Charlene, Vonda, and everybody. So I think we're up to speed on what we need to put back after we take things out. But there's this one section of our project. We've got about a mile and a half it's a riparian buffer project on the Flat River. And and there'll be a lot of native planting there. And I guess that counts for since we'll be putting back native stuff to whatever goes on the Flat River. But there's this one section where our team went down there and we took a look at it, and Scott was with us. And there's this evasive something. I can't remember what it was. It looks like some kind of grass or something, or weed or whatever, and it takes up this very large portion of the floodplain in one section. And I didn't know if there was anything that could be planted that would, help to take out invasive plants or help to combat against invasive plants on the river. Maybe Preston can help me on that. Free advice. I'll take any free architectural advice.
Yeah. So, John, how tall is this grass?
About that tall.
Yeah. I mean, so you've got to outcompete it, because you could do something like, scalp that grass and do like a native seed mix. But ultimately, whatever you're dealing with would probably come back. So how do you outcompete? So you got to find something taller and more aggressive that'll not only shade that grass out to injure it, but then fill in as that grass dies. Because if it just shades it out but doesn't fill back in, where that grass dies, other invasives will just pop up. And, I'm sure you're probably not trying to create a big green wall where you can't see the river. So what would you plant to push that grass out? And you may want to consider some species, like Itea virginica, the sweet spire. That's a pretty prolific colonizer. What I think you're looking for is a mix of one, shrubs that have rhizomatous growth, things like Itea virginica, Ilex glabra, the inkberry holly, if that's appropriate in your zone. I'll have to look for shrubs, but and then may also want to damage some of that grass and replant it with a more aggressive grass. So you may want to consider literally scalping that area and coming back in with river oats, That's a native grass that's designed to aggressively hold a stream bank together. And it's hard to compete with river oats. It'll eat your house if you plant it around a garden in a good spot. Switchgrass may be another good competitor. But yeah, I would consider shrubs that colonize really quickly, and then some aggressive grasses, and see if you can't literally just scalp and harm that grass and replace it with river oats.
And some Stephen just commented that it was called Asian grass. It's more of a
Sure.
John, I think it's Microstegium, Japanese stilt grass.
It's called what again?
Microstegium or Japanese stilt grass. I'll send you a link on an approach to Preston's point, to try to remove it and the seed bed beneath it, to then make it where natives can compete a little better. But it's a little bit of a process to get there, because you got to remove, as Preston was saying, scalp, and then you've got to come back again the next year and remove the seeds that were in the soil, to give the natives a fair chance to go get them.
Yeah, and that microstegia can spread far and wide really quickly, but it is an annual. So it's just like fighting crabgrass in these prairies. If you can just figure out how to shade it out, it's a wimp. It'll disappear. And so I think, yeah, I would start off with a mass planting of river oats. That'll achieve both your ecological goals and just make it simple for you. Microstegia ain't going to compete with river oats.
Gotcha.
Hmm.
All right, that's
I'll
all.
look that up. I see it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful. Whenever it's not there, the floodplain, the riverbank, you can see for like hundreds of yards down the river, and you got this beautiful plain. But then when it comes in season, it's like, man, this stuff. I wish I had cows down here on the water. But yeah, that'd be great, Scott. If you could send me that link, we'll look that up.
I sent it to you in the chat, John.
Thank you, sir. Thank y'all.
All right, we're at the end of time. If you have questions, reach out to RRS, the main address where you got information for this event, or to your regional consultant, and we'll be glad to get answers for you. Thank everyone, and we'll continue to add, if there's a lot of questions, we'll continue to add them on our frequently asked questions page as well. So thank you, everyone. Vonda,